Welcome to another episode. This episode is going to focus on Remco development from my own perspective of doing a playset and several versions of the Monsterizer. I've got a new mic as well as a new filter, so things should sound a little bit cleaner. To give a little context, years ago, I had looked at replacing the Remco playset that I lost during a move, and at that point, the prices were far different than I remembered in terms of what the expectation was for the value at the time, and I was not willing to pay those prices. So obviously I love this thing. It's basically just a vinyl case with cardboard inserts, and so I had considered how I could sort of re-envision and make one for myself that had its own bits of personality. So being a modeler I guess, for my career, and doing environmental art for the game industry, I looked at trying to piece this thing out and build it in three-dimensional components that would be reminiscent of the original playset, but also add a lot of depth and personality by having a lot of surface details. So I spent about 4 weeks on this. Took a lot of time because of the complexity of the inner walls and outer walls and all the dimensional components on the walls themselves. So after getting the basic rough model down, I then started to output pieces to test to make sure that they went together correctly and that everything was built to fit in a very logical way and that the inner walls and outer walls would line up, the structure worked with the roof. So this is my process of doing the original prints and then looking and testing each one to make sure everything fit and the framing elements work together cohesively. Once I had all those pieces built out, I was able to then look at the assembly as a whole and then fit everything together to make sure that it read as expected from the modeling perspective. So each angle looked in terms of the silhouette and personality that I wanted, and also held true to some of the original design of the Remco Mini Monsters playset, and also with attention to making sure all the hinge work was intact and functional for all the doors that were used to store the figures. Once that was done, I was able to look at the painting for each of these pieces, and because it was a vinyl playset illustration, there's a lot more complexity in that, because then it's looking at simulating light and shadow. So each different section had to be shadowed and highlighted in a way that looked similar to the illustration, even to the point of doing light sourcing in the attic, getting the bulb to spill light around, doing a lot of the lab bottles and that sort of thing. These small scale monsters were placed in there. There's from the Monolith Toy stuff that I do with my friend John. I'll be covering that in a future video as well. I then moved on to printing it out full scale. The previous versions were all half-size tests for me to figure out a lot of the mechanical aspects. So once those were figured out, I did the full-scale test and improved a lot of the hinge systems that existed in the previous versions. And by doing several, it allowed me to make improvements along the way, especially for the way in which the doors opened, and a lot of the table stuff and coffin and cage changes came out of those early tests, and I learned a great deal even painting the small scale versions. And one thing that I wanted to focus on the final version is that getting the level of detail in there from a painting perspective, even in dim lighting, that it would show up and read very effectively and carry out sort of the vision for the original Remco Mini Monsters playset, which is, just really pretty amazing. I then set my sights on the Mini Monsterizer for the small scale figures that was only available in KBN catalogs. I did not have this. I didn't even see it in the wild as a kid. I definitely would have. And I wanted to model and do something simple in comparison to the playset, so I set about doing a rough modeling stage for that. And this is my initial print test. I was able to get the right components and some level of functionality that was in the original. Like you could open the cage, you could slide the bed out, you could turn the wheel. I wasn't able to hook up any of the electronics, but at least I got the visual presentation and some of the mechanical function in there that I wanted. I also was able to print out like the clear window and have the grooves in it and tint it green, so it really just read like the original. I wanted to have a display piece in that regard. After going through that smaller monsterizer, I looked at the larger scale and decided that it was just too big for my printer to handle based on the depth and overall height. It's an amazing monsterizer, and I thought I could recreate it at a small scale, so that's what I did. Basically took that form and built it out for the 3 3/4 mini monsters, which worked from a functionality standpoint. The poles would glow, the bed would slide out, it had a lever on the side, you could lift up the hinge cage. John and I from Monolith, we made miniature versions of these and sold them at shows over the years, and they came with a bunch of small mini monsters like Nosferatu or Kurt Barlow. We did color versions of them that paid homage to the KB version. We also released glow versions, so we even took that and scaled it up into a 6-inch form with some modifications and packed a Frankenstein into that. So I'll go into more of the Monolith stuff in a future video for sure. And that shows the box version that we just released a couple of months ago, even around Halloween. We did a couple dozen of these that we sold through the Etsy shop. So they were really fun to do, and they fit the figures fine. I did return to the 8-inch scale, as you can see here. I had gotten a large printer, it just made it possible. So we had a need, John and I, when doing an 8-inch Remco style figure in the window box, to do a photograph for the back. So I wanted to reapproach that base level design and see if I could build my own that minimized the amount of plastic but still paid some sort of close attention to the designs that were in the original, and that's where I landed for that. That next photo shows my daughter posing for the back of the box, and then you can see how it's used in context in that way. This shows the Salem's Lot Mr. Barlow figure, which I'll be doing an entire video on the Remco stuff very soon that goes through the whole process development on these guys. Once again, I thank you for your time. Feel free to leave a comment if you've worked on anything custom yourself, anything Remco related you wanted to share when it comes to mini monsters or the 9-inch figures or anything like that. Please do. Thanks again.